Hello students, this is Rudra sir here. Today we are going to do a chapter from your ISC stories, the Echoes, the book. The name of the story is The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. Now, before we go into this story, we need to know a little bit about the backdrop of the time or the setting. It's towards the end of the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s. So it's just about that time, the transition time when we are talking about. Now there are a lot of things happening around this time. The workplaces were undergoing a change. Factory workers were becoming a bit humane now. They were treating the workers with a little bit more of relaxation, providing them with leisure time, which earlier they were not getting. Then the country was going through economic recession. Again, this is one more important thing which is highlighted. Electric lighting was being introduced. Then there were radios which were coming into play. People were getting entertained. But now, coming to the most important part, women. Women were not in a good position. The working woman was looked down upon in society. So no matter why they took up the job, they may be due to some family constraints or something, no matter what, they were looked down upon. So working was, as you can say, concentrated only among the very lower class of society. Working women belonged or came from rather the very lowest rung of society. The National American Women's Suffrage Association was created in 1890, which fought for the social and political rights of women. So that was the time. But although Kate Chopin was not a member of this, but still she believed in it. Now coming to Kate Chopin. Kate Chopin was a writer who was a very controversial writer. She wrote about controversial topics, particularly this story. This story highlights about women feminism. Now feminism she highlights about in this story, the repression of women that was there. This story was earlier entitled The Dream of an Hour, and later on it was renamed as this one, The Story of an Hour. So it was in 1894, it was published as The Dream of an Hour, you have it, and the next year in 1895 it was again published as The Story of an Hour. Now, as I was discussing, women in the 19th century, they were victims of repression, as you will see in this character of Mrs. Mallard. They were supposed to be demure, gentle and passive, somewhat like Portia, you can say, of Merchant of Venice, somewhat like that. And most cases it was against the woman's will. It was against her personal desires, personal wishes. Similar to our central character, Louise Mallard, who is going to be a similar character who is repressed. She does not feel free. And one more important thing is repression in marriage. Now, marriages were in those days regarded as a system to keep women in check. It was a kind of entrapment. So what she does is, Kate Chopin seems to highlight here through this story the need for a world that respects women and values them as partners in marriage, as well as capable individual, recognizing their individual qualities and attributes. That's what the story does. Okay, so basically the story highlights the theme of freedom, repression and marriage. These are the three themes that are highlighted in the story. Before we go into the story, the name of the central character or couple, as we may say, is Mr. and Mrs. Mallard. Now Mallard, as you know or you may be knowing, it's a kind of a free bird, a wild duck or a free bird, and suggesting in a way that Mrs. Mallard is also wanting or desiring to be a free bird, but unfortunately she is not allowed to be like that. She's repressed. She's like a bird kept in a cage, somewhat like I know why the cage bird sing, the cage bird of your ICC syllabus by Maya Angelou. So she's like that bird kept captive in the cage. Here she's kept captive in the prison. Okay, so we go ahead with the text and then I'll be doing a little bit of other analysis. Okay, take out your text. It's on page 54 of your book Echoes. Now first, the introduction. The introduction suggests a precondition. What is that precondition? Knowing that Mrs. Mallard was afflicted with a heart trouble, great care was taken to break to her as gently as possible the news of her husband's death. So as gently as possible, the news of her husband's death was broken out to her. The reason being, there's a precondition. The precondition is she has a heart trouble or a heart condition. It was her sister Josephine who told her in broken sentences, veiled hints that revealed in half concealing. So, who was given the duty? The duty was given to Josephine, the sister of Mrs. Mallard, and she spoke in broken sentences, veiled hints that revealed in half concealing. So they are opposite, contrary, revealed and then half concealing. Maybe suppose if you have to live life all on your own, what you will do? Suppose your husband is not here with you, what you will do? How will you lead life? Such hints. She may have said, no, he's gone to work, he will return. Suppose he doesn't need to return at all. Suppose he has an affair with someone and he goes away forever, leaving you all alone. Such kind of hints and suggestions, that is revealed in half concealing. Her husband's friend Richards was there too, near her. So her husband's friend, that is Mr. Mallard's friend, Richards, he was there too. It was he who had been in the newspaper office when intelligence of the railroad disaster was received. In those days there was no media to highlight breaking news of the train accident. So somehow he had got the news that there's a train accident and he had gone to the newspaper office, the only place to get authentic information. So he had gone there when intelligence of the railroad disaster was received, when Brentley Mallard's name leading the list of killed. So he got the news that's about this rail accident and he confirmed it. And one more important thing, in the list of the people killed, he saw the first name is that of Mr. Brentley Mallard, the husband of Mr. Mallard. He had only taken the time to assure himself of its truth by a second telegram. He put in a second telegram to confirm whether there's been some printing error, there's been some kind of mistake, and they confirmed back and said, there's a person called Mr. Mallard and we have Brentley Mallard and we have found his dead body, he's dead. And had hastened to forestall any less careful, less tender friend in bearing the sad message. Now what is the meaning of this? The meaning is that before someone else gets the news and comes rushing in and banging at Mrs. Mallard's door and saying, your husband is dead, and all, a sudden shock because she has a heart condition. Before that can happen, he came in, assessed the situation and brought in the sister of Mrs. Mallard and Josephine and told her that, look, this is the news and you have to slowly but surely break it out to her before someone else comes rushing in and gives her the news. She did not hear the story as many... she did not hear the story as many women have heard the same, with a paralyzed inability to accept its significance. Now, there are many people who react to the sad news or this such kind of shocking and terrible news in different ways. Some become stone like statues. There's a poem, Home They Brought the Warrior Dead. I think it's by Robert Southey. And there the woman's husband, who is a warrior, is brought in dead. And she is like stupefied. There's no reaction, there's no tears in her eyes. And she's like a statue. She doesn't react, no matter how well they speak about him, how well they speak of his bravery and all that. There's no reaction from him. She's like a statue. Here, she didn't do like that. She didn't react like that. She wept at once with sudden wild abandonment in her sister's arms. Wild abandonment, setting free all her emotions, all her sorrow. She wept. Wept and wept. When the storm of grief had spent itself. So, here the comparison of her tears is with storm. Now what happens? A storm starts and then after a period of time, it stops. That's the end of the storm. Now, similarly here also what is happening is, she wept for some time, and then she stopped weeping. A person cannot go on weeping endlessly. So, it ended. So, here the comparison is, her crying for some time is equal to a storm that is passing on. When the storm of grief had spent itself, she went away to her room alone. Now, this is significant, alone. She would have no one follow her. Why? She wants to be on her own. She wants to assess the situation on her own, to be at one with her own self. Make her mind realize, yes, this is the truth, this is the realization. There stood facing the open window. Now, a contrasting thing, it should have been closed shutters and dark, damp room and all that. Nothing of this. Open window, which is you can write down beside in your book. A gateway to new life. It's a symbol of freedom, a new life starting, a gateway. Just like you have a gate and entrance, similarly this window, this open window with no bars and all, it seemed to be an open gateway to her for a new life. A comfortable roomy armchair. Again, see, there is a relaxing mood. This is probably the only place in the whole house which she can call her own and which is a relaxing corner. So, a comfortable roomy armchair. Into that she sat. Into this she sank. She as if immersed herself into this comfortable position, into this comfort. Pressed down by a physical exhaustion that haunted her body. Because she had cried for so long, she was physically exhausted. So that exhaustion made her sink down into that comfortable armchair that haunted her body and seemed to reach into her soul. This sadness seemed to be reaching to her not only from her physical body onto her soul. She means she is tired in soul as well as body. Now the tired in soul, you will say it's because of the sadness. No, it's not about the sadness. It's a much what you can say. It's a past history. That's the marriage. The marriage is such a heavy load for her that it has saddened her soul. That is what is hinted at here. Her marriage with Mr. Mallard is not a happy one, which is highlighted first time here through this. Reach into her soul. The exhaustion of her body, which may be because of her crying and all this exhaustion, but the exhaustion of her soul is because of her bad relation, that hard, discomforting marriage which she is continuing. She could see in the open square before her house the tops of trees that were all aquiver with the new spring of life. So the new spring life, which is again you can underline and write down, it's a sign of rebirth. Spring is coming, so there are new leaves on the tops of the trees. And from her window she can see that. That's another sign of a new life. Nature's way of recreating life again. So from that open square of her house, the tops of the trees she could see, and there she found that new spring coming to life, new spring life, the new leaves coming to life. That's what she saw. It is a sign of rebirth. It is a sign of great nature recreating herself, nature regeneration. The delicious breath of rain was in the air. Another great sign of natural beauty and natural life, as we may say. Delicious breath of rain was in the air. In the street below, a peddler was crying his wares. A peddler was selling his wares below. The notes of a distant song which someone was singing reached her faintly. Distant song, a happiness. See all these images of the open window, the new spring life, delicious breath of rain. Now the notes of the distant song of merriment, of course. From far off someone is singing it, reaching her ears faintly. And countless sparrows were twittering in the eaves. The sparrows are not sad. The sparrows are not sad, otherwise they would have been quiet. They are happy. And that is why they are twittering with excitement and happiness. So all these are signs of happiness which are quite in contrast with the mood of Mrs. Mallard, who has just now received the news of her husband's death. So this prepares us for something which is going to come now, and it's a foreboding that something different is going to happen now. Because the writer could have easily presented scenes of sadness which would have been much more in assimilation with her mood of sadness. But she doesn't do that. What she does is she presents the opposite, the contrasting pictures of spring, of the open window, sparrows twittering and all this, to highlight that something else is going to happen now. The story is going to be on a different track. There were patches of blue sky showing here and there through the clouds that had met and piled one above the other in the west facing our window. Now, clouds, what happens is, one after the other they pile up. They pile up one after the other. And then they form different formations, and then they darken up a bit, and then there is rain. Now, patches of blue sky here refers to the bits of blue sky which you could see in the future, referring to her bleak future also. Okay, bleak future, why? She has not imagined life without her husband. Now she imagines, what is going to happen to me without my husband? How will I earn my livelihood? How will I survive? All these bleak future things are being highlighted through. So one after the other, the clouds gathering one after the other is a sign of the thought process. One after the other, different kinds of thoughts are assimilating, just as the clouds are assimilating one after the other in the sky, packing up one after the other. So piled one above the other, just like that. She sat with her head thrown back upon the cushion of the chair, quite motionless, except when a sob came up into her throat and shook her. As a child who has cried herself to sleep continues to sob in his dream. Just as a child in his sleep continues to sob in his dream because of the long duration of crying, a child when it goes to sleep, you will see sometimes in its sleep it is sobbing out. Just once in a while. Similarly, she also has cried for a long time. So occasionally a sob is coming up to her. That means it's a kind of a remembrance. In the midst of all this happiness or happy pictures and images, a sob comes up reminding to her, okay, your husband is dead. After some time again, your husband is dead. That sob coming up reminds her. She was young with a fair, calm face, whose lines bespoke repression. Now see here the marriage is hinted at. She's a repressed character. Her face shows that she is a repressed character. She is a repressed wife under her husband. And even a certain strength. But there was a certain strength in her character which suggested that she is out there to fight. She's not going to surrender gently. She has that inner strength in her. But now there was a dull stare in her eyes. Okay, but now there was a dull stare in her eyes whose gaze was fixed away off yonder, one of those patches of blue sky. So far off on one of those patches of sky, blue sky, she had fixed her gaze. That means she's concentrated on one particular thing. She's thinking now of one particular thing. That is why her gaze is fixed on that particular thing. It is not a glance of reflection, but rather indicated a suspension of intelligent thought. That means she is at present not thinking of any intelligent thought as such. It is suspension of all the intelligent thought. It is not even a glance of reflection. She is just concentrated there, thinking about literally nothing, you can say. Just soaking in the condition that she is in now at present. There's something coming to her. And with that, there was a thought process that was going on. Something was coming to her and she was waiting for it fearfully. Now something is coming to her, she is waiting for something. She doesn't know, something is coming towards her. And she is waiting and waiting for it fearfully. Just as in a horror movie you see a ghost approaching and the victim is fearfully waiting for it to approach. Or maybe a robber is coming and he is fearfully waiting for the approach of the robber or that fearful animal approaching. So here also, she was waiting for it fearfully. What was it? She did not know. It was too subtle and elusive to name. She didn't know what it was. She was actually feeling it inside, but she seemed to not know as if. But she felt it creeping out of the sky, reaching towards her through the sounds, the scents, the color that filled the air. But she could feel that it was coming to her through the sound, the scent, the color. So all this is jubilant and joyful all around. The color, the sound, the scent. The scent of the rain, you know, the sound, sparrows twittering and all. Color, blue sky, clouds coming up, the green leaves, all this. So all around there is happiness, there is freedom, there is merriment. Now her bosom rose and fell tumultuously. Tumultuously her bosom rose and fell. She was beginning to recognize this thing. That is, as if now that realization is slowly coming to her. That was approaching to possess her. Now she realized that thing, now she recognized that thing that is coming to approach her. And she was striving to beat it back with her will. With her willpower, she is trying to resist. Okay, now I'll give a different context in this regard. Those of you who have seen Harry Potter, in that there is I think it's in the Order of the Phoenix or something. Yes, maybe it's Order of the Phoenix. Yes, or Half-Blood Prince. In that one particular story, there is this reference of the Dark Lord Voldemort trying to get into the mind of Harry Potter. And then there's this professor, Dr. Snape, who tries to train him as how he could control his mind so that Lord Voldemort doesn't reach up into his mind and thought process and stop him and blocking him in that way. Okay, so he teaches him how to block others from entering his thoughts. Here also it's just like that. That realization of her freedom is probably coming to her, and she's trying to beat it back with her willpower. Okay, as powerless as her two white slender hands would have been, she's a very delicate kind of a woman with two white slender hands, and with those slender hands she cannot beat back any powerful force. Similarly, her willpower is also very weak. It is unable to overcome or push back that thing that is coming to her. When she abandoned herself, a little whispered word escaped her slightly parted lips. Abandoned herself means now she let go. She surrendered. She said, okay, I cannot do anything. Just as Italy surrendered before the coronavirus and announced to the world that no, we are powerless, our medical system is crashed, we cannot do anything more for our people, we surrendered before the coronavirus. So just like that, she surrendered. Okay, I cannot resist this, whatever it is coming, I cannot resist it anymore, I've surrendered. And after she surrendered, from her lips, which were parted now, which are no longer closed, parted, she said it over, a word escaped, and she said it over and over under her breath. And that word, one single word that is repeated thrice, very significant, the word is free, free, free. As if to make her realize, herself to realize that yes, she is now free. Free from what? That repressive marriage, she is free from that. That repressive character, Mr. Mallard, she is free from him. She is free from his domination, she is free from that control. She is like that slave whose master is dead, and that slave is free. So here she is also like that, free. The vacant stare and the look of terror that had followed it went from her eyes. From her eyes, the vacant stare was gone. The look of terror that was there, that is also gone. They stayed keen and bright. Her eyes were now very keen, they were very bright. Her pulses beat fast. Why she is excited? So that's why her pulse is now beating fast. And coursing blood warmed and relaxed every inch of her body. That relaxing adrenaline kind of a rush all around her body seemed to have relaxed her now. She did not stop to ask if it were or were not a monstrous joy that held her. She did not question whether this is a monstrous joy, whether I should be enjoying it or not. She did not question it. A clear and exalted perception enabled her to dismiss the suggestion as trivial. She seemed to dismiss this suggestion as trivial. No, it's a small matter. I should not be discussing about this, whether it is appropriate or inappropriate to enjoy this joy at present or not. She knew she would weep again when she saw the kind, tender hands folded in death, the face that had never looked save with love upon her fixed and grey and dead. So now she knew that when she looked at that face, which face? Mr. Mallard's face, when his dead body would be brought in the coffin, his hands clasped close to his breast, when she would see that face, she knew very well she would once again weep. That is when she saw his face like this, it's closed with his hands relaxed on his breast, she would again weep. She knew that. She knew this face never looked at her. It was very fixed and grey face it would be, and it is the face of a person who is dead. That means Mr. Mallard is dead. But she saw beyond that bitter moment a long procession of years to come that would belong to her absolutely. Now beyond that moment, after the funeral, she looked at, she said, this is a brief moment. When I will have to cry, I'll be sad and all that. After that what? There are a number of years waiting for me, a procession of years, one after the other, procession of years that would belong to her absolutely. It would be totally hers. And she opened and spread her arms out to them in welcome. She as if spread out her arms now. Here comes to that image of, or the reference I was telling earlier about the name, Mrs. Mallard. Mallard is a bird. Bird stretches out its wings to fly. Here, now she realizes that the cage is broken. I am no longer a captive bird. I am now spread out my wings and I can fly. That is why she spread out her arms and she opened and spread her arms out to them in welcome. Sitting in that sitting posture, she stretched out her arms openly to welcome. Someone like Shah Rukh Khan spreads out his hands to welcome his beloved. Somewhat like that, she spread out her hands to welcome the newfound freedom. There would be no one to live for her during those coming years. So she would live for herself. She does not have to live for anyone now for these coming years. She would live for only one person, that is herself. There would be no powerful will bending hers in that blind persistence with which men and women believe they have a kind of... Okay, now there would be no powerful will bending hers in that blind persistence with which men and women believe they have a right to impose a private will upon a fellow creature. Now, in those days, men had the upper hand in terms of marriage. You know that. I had told earlier in the video that men, it's a patriarchal society. Men were dominant, women were subjugated. So here, Mr. Mallard's strong will subjugated the lower or weaker will of Mrs. Mallard. Okay, but in some other marriages also nowadays with the advancement of science, nowadays men and women, they have the equal rights, and sometimes it happens that woman's will is stronger and it suppresses a man's will. So, but in marriage, actually, what should happen is each of them should have their own individuality. It should be 50% man, 50% woman. It should be in that ratio, the will. But if one of them has the upper hand, then that will becomes much more predominant. Here also, Mr. Mallard's will was much more predominant to Mrs. Mallard's. A kind intention or a cruel intention made the act seem no less a crime as she looked upon it in that brief moment of illumination. In that brief moment of illumination, she realized, yes, so long I have been subjugated by my husband. And it's a kind of a very cruel kind of an intention that she realized that I have been treated so very cruelly. And it's actually like a crime. So for a brief moment she felt, okay, now I am liberated from that superior will. Now I am liberated from that external influence that I have been subjected to for so long. And yet she had loved him. And mind you, after that immediately there is a dash, sometimes. So she had loved him sometimes. Often she had not. So if you go by ratio, it's like 90% of the time or 95% of the time she hated him. She did not love him. And 5% or 10% of the time she loved him. What did it matter? Now it didn't matter. What could love, the unsolved mystery, count for in face of this possession of self-assertion, which she suddenly recognized as the strongest impulse of her being? So here there are two things. One, love, the unsolved mystery, love that she had for Mr. Mallard and all that. It's an unsolved mystery. So let's keep it on one side. And the other side is this possession of self-assertion, this feeling of independence, this feeling of being her own, having her own individuality. She compares both the things and says, she suddenly recognized as the strongest impulse of her being. She realized after comparing both the two, no, love is not that important. This one, this predominance of my own individuality is much more important to me than that of the other aspect, that love, which is an unsolved mystery, we don't know what it is actually and all that. Free, body and soul free, she kept whispering, as if she's a hawker, peddling. There's a peddler selling his wares like that. She's like a peddler. She's selling her wares. Buy one, get one free, like that. Body and soul free, free, she's kept whispering. Why? To assure herself, yes, now my body, my soul is free. I am free, I am my own master. Josephine was kneeling before the closed door with her lips to the keyhole, imploring for admission. Josephine was kneeling down. Where? Before the closed door. There was no other means of access to through the door. The only thing is the keyhole through which she had put her lips, and she was imploring admission. She was requesting, she was pleading for admission. She wanted to be inside. Louise, open the door. I beg you, open the door. You will make yourself ill. What are you doing, Louise? For heaven's sake, open the door. So she is imploring, she is pleading, please open the door. You will make yourself ill. Now this is very important. The person outside is thinking, that is, Josephine is thinking, this woman, my sister Louise, she has just suffered the loss of her husband. Plus she has a heart condition. Maybe she is going to make herself ill. So I should be with her. I should not let her alone. She is pleading, that is why to gain admission. But this is actually a line of irony. If you want, you can underline, you will make yourself ill. Why is it full of irony? Because Josephine thinks that Louise or Mrs. Mallard is making herself ill by being there all alone. But we as the reader or the audience know that the opposite is the case. She is actually enjoying life. She is full of happiness. She is experiencing a newfound freedom. Go away. I am not making myself ill. This is what Mrs. Mallard says. No, go away. I am not making myself ill. No. She was drinking in the very elixir of life through that open window. So as if from heaven that elixir is being poured, that divine drink is being poured, and it's coming in through the open window, and she is drinking it. She's enjoying that divine drink or elixir of happiness, of freedom. Her fancy was running riot along those days ahead of her future. She's thinking about that, and her mind is running riot. She's thinking about all those future days that she's going to enjoy. Spring days and summer days and all sorts of days that would be her own. Her alone. That would be not belonging to anyone else. They would not belong to any other particular person. She breathed a quick prayer that life might be long. And then The next line is, it was only yesterday she had thought with a shudder that life might be long. Now let us analyze first yesterday. Yesterday when she was leading that impressive marriage life with Mr. Mallard, she had thought with a shudder, oh God, how long will I live? I have to suffer this torturous marriage, oh God, I don't know how long you will keep me alive and all that. Today, the contrasting thing is, she says, she breathed a quick prayer that life might be long. Today she actually wants to live long. Yesterday she wanted to die quickly, so that she would be free from this marriage. Today she wants to live for a longer period of time, so that she can enjoy her life. She arose at length and opened the door to her sister's importunities. Importunities means request and pleading. The sister Josephine had made, for that she finally opened the door. There was a feverish triumph in her eyes, and she carried herself unwittingly like a goddess of victory. Without her knowing, she was walking like a winner, a goddess of victory she was walking. And interestingly, if many of you don't know, the goddess of history of victory is Nike, the famous shoe brand you all must be knowing. So that name Nike comes from the goddess of victory. So she was here herself, carrying herself like Nike, the goddess of victory. She was very unwittingly, unknowingly, she was walking like that, she was feeling like that. She clasped her sister's waist, and together they descended the stairs. Richards stood waiting for them at the bottom. At the bottom, Richards is waiting for them. Holding her sister's waist, they slowly came down the steps. Now comes the climax. Someone was opening the front door with a latch key. Latch key is the key with which the front door can be opened from the outside. It's the door to the main entrance. Now it's a sign of patriarchy. How and why I will explain later on. When I go into the imagery, I will explain it. But so far it is someone. It was Bentley Mallard. Surprised. Who entered? A little travel stained. Now because he had travelled by train, there's a lot of dust and other stains of travel on his clothes. Composedly carrying his grip. So he was carrying his grip sack and his umbrella. He was carrying both those things, his bag and his umbrella. Both had. He had been far from the scene of the accident and did not even know there had been one. So maybe he has gone to a different direction, maybe from wherever the accident had happened. Suppose assuming it took place in the east, the accident, he was on the west. So he didn't know, and he had no information that such an accident had taken place in the east, and there's a name of a person named Bentley Mallard who is the head of the dead list. So he didn't know anything about the accident, anything about that list of dead people, and his name being there, and he knows nothing about it. So he came home. He stood amazed at Josephine's piercing cry, and seeing him, Josephine uttered a piercing, sharp cry. And he was surprised. What is the matter? I've just entered my house. Why is my sister-in-law shouting like this? At Richard's quick motion to screen him from the view of his wife, Richard somehow tried to come in between Mr. Mallard and Mrs. Mallard, so that Mrs. Mallard might not be able to see Mr. Mallard. He tried to come in between, but Richard was too late. But he was too late. By that time, Mrs. Mallard had already seen Mr. Mallard. And then she falls down in a heap. And when the doctors came, the doctors were called for. When the doctors came, they said she had died of heart disease. Of joy that kills. Of joy that kills is an irony. I'll come to that. So, what did the doctor analyze? The doctor analyzed and says of joy that kills. They said she has died of excessive joy. How has she died of excessive joy? Now, she has died of excessive joy because she thought her husband is dead. This is the doctor's interpretation. She thought her husband is dead, and then suddenly she sees her husband alive before her, hale and hearty. That gives her a great shock. She is excessively happy. That excessively happiness causes her heart to stop, and she dies. That's the doctor's interpretation. But we as readers know very well what has happened. After Mr. Mallard's death, she is happy. She's happy. She's planning for her future. She knows she's going to spend her few years of her life, days, months in happiness. She's planning all of that. She knows she's going to be her own mistress. There's going to be no one to control her and all that. And she's going to be her own master. Suddenly she sees Mrs. Mallard alive. He's not dead, he's alive. That means she's back to square one. That's from where she started. She's back to the place where she originally was before the news of her marriage. before the news of the accident came in that repressive marriage she is in. So she was now restored back to that same horrible position in which she was earlier. There is no respite for her. She is in that same condition. So that provides her with a great shock, that what I thought to be freedom from this repressive marriage is gone. Again I have to lead that same kind of repressive life under this man. This sadness, excessively fluctuation from happiness to sadness, causes her death. This we know, but the doctor doesn't know that, so he makes his own biological interpretations. So somewhat like that. Now coming to the imagery, of course, there's the heart trouble first. The heart trouble indicates the breakdown of society. Okay, the fundamental structure of society, which is marriage, it refers to the breakdown of that, because marriage is a matching up of hearts of one another. When the heart matchup is not there in marriage, the marriage breaks down, and the marriage breaks down, different marriages break down all over society, then the society breaks down. So here it refers to that emotional breakdown of marriages, to the heart trouble of Mrs. Mallard. Next is Josephine and Richards. They stand for society and society's manner in which they treat a widow. Now when Mrs. Mallard becomes a widow, they treat her like a child. Just like a child has to be taken care of and looked after all the time, similarly they also look upon her in that manner. So that is society's reaction towards a widow, that a widow is helpless, she has to be taken care of and all that. New spring of life which comes, which is referred to in that part, it refers to that Louise is reborn just as nature is after the harsh winter. Here harsh winter refers to her harsh marriage. So just after a harsh marriage, she has this new spring of life where she assumes that she is free, similar to nature, where after the winter there is spring and new life and all that. Latchkey, which I told earlier, is a sign of patriarchy. It is Mr. Mallard who has the key, but Mrs. Mallard doesn't have the key. So Mrs. Mallard is confined to home, Mr. Mallard is outside. Freedom is limited for Mrs. Mallard, that is why. But Mr. Mallard, he is free. He can go anywhere he wants. He moves around the outside world. He uses railroad transport. He walks in and out of the house at his own will, having his own key. So that's how the story ends. And finally we are left with Mr. Mallard. Mr. Mallard is left in the end probably to mourn for his wife, whom he had never treasured and loved. Probably he is left with that. So that's how the story ends. I hope you found my line by line explanation, which I tried my level best to explain to you. If you have found it interesting and helpful, do give it a thumbs up, a like button, press it, and share it among your friends so that it may help them also. And of course, subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.